In 1994, Archbishop Desmond Tutu declared South Africa to be the Rainbow Nation after decades of apartheid had come to an end. That same year, South Africa adopted its current flag, prominently featuring the convergence of the nation's diverse people, the black, yellow, and green representing the African National Congress, while the red, white, and blue pay homage to the colonial British government of the past. The idea of diverse people, roots, and distinctive identities was turned into a source of pride for the fledgling country, with many in the Western intelligentsia proclaiming optimism for its future, while taking notes for their own increasingly diverse homelands. 30 years later, and most can say that the rainbow experiment was a failure. With whites emigrating yearly, a lagging growth in GDP, and violent crime rates, the UN placed second globally in terms of assaults and murders. Though the specific contributing factors to any country's outcomes will be complex and unique to its circumstances, a simple question is begged by the sheer failure of South Africa to achieve peaceful coexistence. Is conflict and social strife inevitable in a multi-ethnic environment? Let's step back a bit. The last example helps to paint a picture of a modern society steeped in ethnic and racial differences. But what even is ethnicity? Why do Sahrawis in Western Sahara not want to be ruled by Moroccans? Why do ancient Spartans use a prehistoric origin myth to unite the Dorians of the Peloponnese against the Attic speakers of Athens? And most importantly, why do these identities and myths of origin work to motivate people towards self-sacrifice? And how could they help explain why rainbow nations may not be nations at all? To answer these questions, we need to first travel back to prehistory, a period where we humans spent 99% of our existence living in. It is estimated that anatomically modern humans emerged around 300,000 years ago, and that hominids from our ancestral genus emerged some 2.8 million years ago. During that period, humans and our hominid ancestors lived in groups and competed with one another over scarce resources, a competition that was marred by violence. Steve Pinker has estimated that in early hunter-gatherer societies, death from violence may have been how 1 in 7 people met their end. In this brutish and violent past, humans developed methods for preserving their lives and the lives of those closest to them. Their families. It is this care for family, a psychological predisposition that is baked into our biology, that helps to explain the eventual development of ethnicity. In our family, we evolve a protective proclivity, protecting someone who isn't you or our direct descendant at first makes little sense from an evolutionary point of view. Suppose someone has a selfless gene, which makes them predisposed to protecting those outside their direct genetic lineage. The increased risk you are subjected to for the benefit of those who are not your direct descendants would mean that the chances you pass on these selfless genes would be lower than the chances of someone without the gene surviving to procreate. Furthermore, it would reason that people who are the most selfish survive the most and go on to reproduce. Yet this is not what we observe today. Humans routinely die for family, both real and perceived. So how did this selfless gene survive? Namely, through tribes. Evolution is not strictly an individual process, but often occurs due to mutual cooperation and collaboration. Take the example of 2 tribes. One tribe has developed a mutation that creates a desire to selflessly protect the group, while the other does not. In an environment of scarce resources, the selfless tribe has individuals who are ready and willing to take risks to secure what is needed for their tribe to survive. As long as more tribespeople are born as a result of these conquests than die to achieve it, they will go on to reproduce this selfless gene. Okay, I get how being selfless can benefit the family, but I don't get what this has to do with ethnicity. Not all Irish people are family. Though the Irish are not all literally brothers and sisters, there is something to be said about consecutive circles of family. Assuming we aren't adopted, we all generally know who our siblings and parents are, our cousins and grandparents, maybe some of our second cousins, aunts, and uncles, but we still have family beyond this point. Who could identify their third or fourth cousin? Probably unlikely. Yet, when looking at prehistoric tribes, we're really talking about family circles that extend to around this area. This means tribes would be around a few thousand people encompassing multiple clans of extended family. The evolutionary advantage of these larger confederations of multiple clans help to minimize inbreeding and maximize manpower in times of conflict. Yet an issue remains. How do you distinguish a member of your tribe from those of foreign tribes if you can't recognize your fourth cousin? Now we have the birth of culture. Culture, including your language, dialect, dress, faith, and ritual, all help to establish who your kin are and thus your tribe. It's why we have such a developed ear for slight accents. We are looking for hints that this person is in our tribe or foreign. A great example of this actually comes from the Bible. Recall how God instructed the Israelites to circumcise their young and observe a plethora of often highly specific and seemingly random rules. Modern observers have tried to rationalize these instructions by pointing to some hidden benefit that the ancient Hebrews justified through divine mandate, such as the cleanliness that comes from circumcision or the uncleanliness of pork and other sorts of sea bottom feeders. But what does the Bible say is the actual justification? In Leviticus 20:22-23, it states, "Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land wherever I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I am going to drive out before you, because they did all these things, I abhorred them." The Bible is not the only ancient tradition to feature customs meant to distinguish kin from others. The ancient Spartans believed themselves to be outsiders, descended from common stock, and preserved an ethnic hierarchy that kept the native Helot separate and oppressed. Though more explicit in these ancient sources, this basic concept is known as kin culture identification, and it is how our ancestors distinguished kin from outsiders and created cohesion needed to coordinate early society. Because these identifiers are not limited to a fixed number of participants, tribal identifiers can give way to national identifiers as societies scale up in number. Often, the forging of a national will involves the leveling of tribal differences in favor of a larger common culture we might call ethnicity. Though historically, alternative terms like nation and even race meant the same thing. Not every Gaul in the 1st century BC France saw themselves as member of the same tribe, but they all knew they were Gauls and Romans were not. Romans, too, started as a collection of Latin tribes who united to form the core of the early republic. As Hannibal's army moved through Italy, gaining collaborators from Greeks to the south and Etruscans to the north, the Latins remained faithful to their ethnic cohort in Rome. Eventually, the tribal differences in most developed nations will disappear entirely, only remembered by regional names like Avignon in France, named after the Avarni Gaelic tribe. Our evolved sense of kin culture identification, born out of prehistoric tribal organization, is a core component of both ancient and modern nation-building. Though few Western academics study nation-building through this context, instead pathologizing these feelings of ethnic interest as nationalism, which is then maligned as an 18th century invention with no intrinsic staying power. If it was born so recently, it can be discarded just as easily. The reasoning for this claim is short-sighted, often only focusing on medieval Europe and relying on the assumption that only elites had ethnic self-interest. Though Spartans indeed had a sense of Dorian identity, and the Latins saw an ethnic bond between them, these views surely did not permeate down to the peasants. Yet why do we make this assumption? Did the classical world not have public ceremony, oration of myth and legend, or even just communication between different classes? The idea that the peasant, who would regularly be extorted for grain, visited by merchants, obliged to sacrifice in the state temples, and conscripted to fight in the state's wars, was at the same time ignorant of sentiments of literate classes, flies in the face of common sense. And this is assuming national identity was just elite-driven, which ignores how historically and today elites tend to be fairly cosmopolitan, while their uneducated populations tend to disdain perceived foreigners. To garner the support of the Roman people, Octavian famously used propaganda claiming his rival, Mark Antony, had been corrupted by foreign Egyptian culture. When it comes to wives of rulers being perceived as too foreign, the list could fill its own book, including Marie Antoinette being too Austrian for France, Isabella of France being too French for England, and Catherine de' Medici being too Italian for France, and the list goes on. To chalk this all up to elite-driven prejudice ignores that it's often the poor masses in a society who are the most prejudiced, not the elites. Why scholars don't like to admit either the historicity of ethnic sentiments or its popular nature is that it exposes how intractable these identities really are, how fundamentally human they are. If your project is to build rainbow nations out of every multi-ethnic society, increasingly a project for many newly multi-ethnic Western countries, but ethnicity is largely intractable, a part of human evolutionary sociology, you must fight against intractable human nature. If, alternatively, feelings of ethnic solidarity towards one's own and distrust towards perceived others is simply a social and modern phenomenon, then changing it is not impossible. To believe the latter, as we have briefly demonstrated here, relies on a narrow reading of history and makes unfounded assumptions about how society works. Only in the modern era, dominated by Lockean concepts which places society and humanity apart, can ethnicity be so readily discarded. A concept we will explore in a future video, along with deeper explorations of the history of nation building in different regions, so be sure to like and subscribe for our next videos. This video was not a comprehensive argument, as it is limited in time both on screen and from myself for research and development. For further reading, I'd recommend Azargot's Nations, The Long History and Deep Roots of Political Ethnicity and Nationalism. For now, I will leave you with the following excerpt. From Herodotus's Histories, Herodotus writes on the possibility of the Athenians joining forces with the Persians as collaborators in the latter's invasion of Hellenes. And I quote, "For many and great are the reasons which hinder us from doing this, even though we should desire it. First and greatest are that the images and houses of the gods will be set ablaze or reduced to ruin, which we must necessarily avenge to the very utmost rather than make an agreement with him who did these deeds. Then, secondly, there is the bond of our Hellenic race, by which we are the one blood and of one speech, the common temples of the gods and the common sacrifices, the manner of life, which are the same for all. To these it would be well that the Athenians should not become traitors."